This year has brought all kinds of challenges, and we've been working through them all, trying our hardest to figure this out, figure that out. Even this morning, we're having lots of difficulties, once again, trying to figure out how to get a large group of our congregation to be able to worship with us from their homes using their computers. It failed this morning, but we've been trying to get that, trying to work it out, trying to work through the kinks and get to where we're able to do that. How many of y'all really thought that that would be something that we would be doing about, I don't know, let's go just 8 months ago? And you think back to that time that we would need to do it. I mean, sure, it would be a nice thing to have done back then, and it would be good for those who are unable to make it, maybe for some of our shut-ins or whatever the case. But the idea that we're in a position right now where we have folks who are not getting out because of the stuff going around, and maybe even a third of our congregation is dependent upon stuff such as that. Who would have considered that just 8 months ago, wearing a mask would be a divisive issue, and divisive within churches itself, where you have people who have very hard stances one way or the other? Folks, things are just different. We're living differently. We're loving our neighbors differently. What it means to be a Christian, it looks different than what it used to. How many of y'all have found yourself in a supermarket or somewhere out in public, and maybe there's an elderly individual who drops their cane or drops something, and 8 months ago you would have swooped in just like that, picked it up and handed it to them? Yeah, a few months ago I tried to do that, and I was told, "I'm fine, I can take care of it." And I thought, wow, oh, of course. You can't touch other people's things because that's a danger. I mean, just things are different. Even what it looks like to love your neighbor is different. There's at least one thing, though, that has not changed. Well, more than one. I mean, we talked about a few things last week, didn't we? At least 3 things we talked about that haven't changed. But, when we think about this, there are certain things that haven't changed, and one of those things is our worship to God. That we do it, that we focus on this, that we don't give up on this. And the question is why? Why do we focus on worshiping God? Why do we focus on serving God? Why do we focus on living as Christians, loving our neighbors as ourselves? What motivates us? What gets us from one day to the next that makes living for God worth it? In time, we might get to the same place here that our brethren of old were in the first few centuries, who didn't feel oppressed because they had to wear a mask. They felt oppressed because they were rounded up and stuck into an arena, and they were made sport of so the pagans could watch them be devoured by wild animals. That's real oppression and suffering and persecution Christians have faced, and it may be someday soon that Christians here today in our lives begin to feel some of the same kinds of suffering. And we need to ask ourselves this question: why would we do that? Why would we subject ourselves to the suffering, to the pain, to the persecution? Why would we stick through no matter what happens? And this morning I want to begin to look at the way that people in times past have gone into suffering, how they viewed it, what got them through, the willingness to live for God no matter the cost. This morning, I want to take a look at the hope that we have of heaven. Good morning. It's good to be here this morning, isn't it? It's good to have this opportunity to be able to, even in the midst of everything that's swirling around, all the problems, all the issues that you're facing, to just kind of settle down and say, you know what, there are some things that are more important. There are some things that are deeper, better, greater. And being here with fellow Christians The opportunity to be together, to worship together, to look around and say, I'm not the only one. There's still 7,000 out there whose knees have not bowed down, right? To know that we fight with one another. We get through this with one another. We're here for one another. It is great to be here. And I appreciate everyone who is here this morning, who has joined with us. And I also appreciate those who will be viewing this as a recording and taking the time to worship God, even in a recorded session, just some kind of means of connecting, of being able to engage with other Christians. It says an awful lot about all of you, all of us, everyone, that even in the midst of what we're going through, this is still important. And this is what we do. Because we have this hope. We have this focus. We have something ahead of us to look forward to. And that really boils down a lot to the hope we have of heaven. Now, you have to ask this question, what exactly is heaven when you start talking about it? And there are some popular views of heaven that are out there. And, some people have this view that heaven's going to be different for each person. Some people will say, well, heaven to me is going to be like an unending back nine. I'll just continually be playing and, I'll finally get that hole in one on a par 5 that no one's ever done type of a thing. That's some people's view. Let me think of the greatest possible thing, and that greatest possible thing to me is what heaven is. But for some of y'all, you may be like, I don't even know what a back nine is. What in the world's he talking about? It's golf, just, if there was anybody who, maybe didn't know. But for you, it might be something completely different. It might be, just enjoying the magical beach somewhere. And, you think of Hawaii, but you're like, but I can think of Hawaii, so it's got to be better than Hawaii. And some just magical place. Who knows what it is, but all we say, we use these phrases, and you've heard these phrases, is there going to be X, Y, or Z in heaven? And the answer is, of course. Because that's what's important to you, and God's going to give you whatever it is. Even some people, I think, on the verge of blasphemy will say things such as, if there is not X, Y, and Z in heaven, then I don't want to be there. And that is actually kind of an atrocious type of thing to say, but it boils down to this idea that heaven is very individualistic, that my personal heaven is there for me and someone else can have theirs. It's very postmodern if you get right down to it, the idea of what I want, my truth is different from yours. But that's a popular view, is that heaven's just going to be a great experience for each person. There's also this view, is heaven simply a place where dead people go and they live on the clouds with their harps and things such as that. And I like the way that Gary Larson, the author of the Far Side comic, how he illustrates this. You have a guy sitting on a cloud and he's just saying, I wish I'd brought a magazine with me. Because he's there for eternity, just sitting around. And you have to think, sounds a little bit boring to some degree if that's all that heaven really is. And by the way, some people really firmly believe this, and they say, yeah, I don't want to be in heaven, because heaven does sound boring. If that's all it is, you go up, you get your wings, you get a harp, you get a halo, and then you just kind of sit around for eternity. Maybe some people suggest that heaven is a concept. It's an idea. It's not a reality. It's just this thing that's thrown out there for you, and you really will never experience it. It's just this ultimate kind of an idea that's out there to get you, to motivate you to do this. But it's not ever supposed to be seen as an absolute. And so there are some people who look at heaven in this way, that it's just kind of conceptual, but that's the most that it is. Probably one of the most popular views is that it's a group of people who sit and worship God all day long, eternally. That's what they do, and they come before the throne. And so they sit and they just worship, and they worship forever. And so when it comes right down to it, we have to ask the question, what is heaven? Well, here's the problem. I don't know. I can't tell you what heaven is. I can't tell you specifically what heaven is. But here's what we can do. We can look at a few passages that might help us to understand one fact. We want to be there. Now, I'm going to open up to Revelation chapter 21, but here's the thing. Go ahead and put your Bible down. I don't want you to open up to Revelation chapter 21. I want you to close your eyes and just listen. Go ahead. It's okay. You're allowed. I will give you, this is your one chance to close your eyes in the middle of my sermon where I'm not going to take any offense at it, right? But I will take offense if you don't open them up again later, okay? So I'll be watching. I can see your eyes, all right? But go ahead, close your eyes and just listen to how John describes heaven. John writes, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven, the first earth had passed away, and there was no more. The sea was no more. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain any more, because the former things have passed away. And he who was seated on the throne said, Behold, I am making all things new. He also said, Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. He said to me, It's done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty, I will give from the spring of the water of life without payment. The one who conquers will have this heritage, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. But as for the cowardly, the faithless, and the detestable, as for murderers, the sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. Then came one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls of the seven last plagues and spoke to me, saying, Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great high mountain and showed me the holy city Jerusalem coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Its radiance like a most rare jewel, like a jasper, clear as crystal. And it had great high wall with 12 gates. And at the gates 12 angels. And on the gates the number of the 12 tribes of the sons of Israel were inscribed. And on the east 3 gates. And on the north 3 gates. On the south 3 gates. And on the west 3 gates were those names. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations. And on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And the one who spoke with me, he had a measuring rod of gold to measure the city, and its gates, and its walls. And the city lies 4 square, its length the same as its width. And he measured the city with the rod 12,000 stadia. Its length, its width, its height are all equal. He also measured its wall 144 cubits by human measurement, which is also the angel's measurement. This wall was built of jasper. The city was pure gold, like glass. The foundations of the wall of the city were adorned with every kind of jewel. The first was jasper, the second sapphire, the third agate, the fourth emerald, the fifth onyx, the sixth carnelian, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jasper, the 12th amethyst. And the 12 gates were 12 pearls, each of the gates made out of a single pearl. And the streets of the city, the street was pure gold, like transparent glass. And I saw no temple in the city, because its temple is the Lord God, the Almighty, and the Lamb. And the city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and its lamp is the Lamb. By its light, with the nations walk, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. And its gates will never be shut by day, and there will be no night there. They will bring into it the glory and the honor of the nations, but nothing unclean will ever enter into it, nor anyone who does what is detestable or false. Only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. Then the angel showed me a river, the water of life, clear as a crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb. Through the middle of the street of the city, also on either side of the river, the tree of life, with its 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit each month. And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. No longer will there be anything accursed, but the throne of God and of the Lamb will be in it, and the servants will worship him. They will see his face. His name will be on their foreheads. And night will be no more. They will need no light of a lamp. They will need no light of a sun, because the Lord their God will be their light, and they will reign forever and ever. Doesn't that sound beautiful? You can go ahead and open up your eyes. I know some of y'all, do I need to snap or something to wake you up maybe? But yeah, just think about what we just heard. Doesn't that sound absolutely beautiful? Think of this, just a city of gold, and its streets are made out of gold. You have gates that are carved out of single pearls, a massive pearl that is so huge that you can carve a gate out of it. And all of the gates were made from that, costly stones, gems everywhere. This is unbelievable. This captures our imagination when we read through this. This is a picture that we love, that we think about, that we know about. You know, and we have songs that kind of depict this idea, right? We sing about the mansions we have over the hilltop, what it's going to be like when we all get to heaven, how beautiful heaven must be. We sang that just last week. Sing to me of heaven, hilltops of glory. There's a mansion now empty, and that's just a few of the songs that we sing to remind us of how beautiful, how amazing this picture is that we have of heaven. And you know, when I read that, you probably might have been thinking, you know, Chris, I don't know why you said earlier that we don't know what heaven's going to be like. Because you just read something and John kind of just described it, didn't he? I mean, you talked about all of this. Don't we have now the absolute picture of what heaven's going to be? Is this an exact representation that's given to us of heaven? Well, is it? Consider what heaven is. Or perhaps better, consider what heaven is not. Heaven is not some place like Hawaii or the Bahamas, or it's not like some beautiful place here on earth. You can't place heaven on some kind of a map because heaven is not a part of our existence. What John is doing in Revelation chapters 21, 22, he's using accommodative language in order to help us see something. There's a great YouTube video. There may be many of them, but there's one in particular that I think of. There's a blind man who was born blind. He's been blind since birth. And he takes a couple minutes just to describe how weird colors are. He says, people are always trying to describe colors to me, and they do so using other senses. They're like, red is like fire, but blue is like ice. But blue is also like the sky. And he's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. How can ice and the sky be the same thing? Or red is like fire, but a stop sign is red, or whatever the case. He just chuckles. He says white is the absence of color, and yet black is all of the colors swirled together and mixed together. He's like, I can't even begin to think about what this is, because he has no frame of reference. There is nothing in his mind that is able to understand what a color is. And so, you use language that you say, well, maybe if you can think about this might help you to understand this. It's accommodative language that is used in this way to describe something that cannot possibly be described. Much of the book of Revelation, the letter to the 7 churches there, is written in a style of writing that's called apocalyptic literature, apocalyptic writing. And that kind of writing is known for using pictures, using images, highly symbolic language, numbers, and things such as that, in order to describe things not as they are, but to put a symbolic picture in your face, in your mind, before you, so that you can then kind of think about what that reality might be. The pictures and numbers are all over the place, not to give a rigid explanation, but a symbolic idea. I do not believe that there will be golden streets in heaven. I don't think that we are going to walk into gates that are carved out of pearls. I don't think that heaven is going to be a perfect cube, 12,000 stadia this way by 12,000 stadia this way, and 12,000 stadia up into the sky as well, because it's described as a cube itself. It's hard for us to think of a city as a cube, right? But that's the way that it is pictured. But what I do believe is this. If you can close your eyes, and if John can describe to you a city where the streets are made out of gold, the city itself is a golden city. If you can picture what it's like to have a giant pearl, 12 giant pearls, and the gates are carved out of those. If you can picture what it would be like to have this beautiful cube and all of these beautiful pictures, if you can picture that in your mind, then he's saying, I want you to think of that and understand that heaven is going to be better. Whatever it is that you have in your hand or in your mind, I'm giving accommodative language, something that doesn't quite fit. I'm just giving you something you can wrap your mind around so that you know that heaven is gonna be worth it, no matter what it is. The descriptions of heaven give pictures that we're able to understand in order to try to describe something that is outside of our existence, outside of our frame of reference, something that there is no possible way that we could ever wrap our mortal heads around until the time that we get there and experience it in person. But we get some information, don't we? We get just enough to let us know this is a place you want to be. This is a place that you must do whatever it takes to experience it. As one of the great preachers of our day and time has said, if you miss heaven, then you've missed it all. And I think some of what we find in Revelation chapters 21 and 22, particularly chapter 22, verses 1 through 5, connects directly back to Genesis chapter 2, starting in verse 8. Here it says, the Lord God planted a garden toward the east in Eden, and there he placed the man whom he had formed. Out of the ground the Lord God caused to grow every tree that is pleasing to the sight and good for food. The tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now a river flowed out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it divided, and it became 4 rivers. Then the Lord God took the man put him into the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and to keep it. Now, we're in Genesis 2, right? We are before the serpent, we're before the fruit, we're before the curses, we're before all of that takes place in chapter 3. This is how God created things, and he looked down and he saw, and it was very good. That's the way things were here. Very good. This is how God created it. This is the way that he always meant for it to be. And I want you to notice some of the things that we find here. First of all, there's a great river that flows. Didn't we see a great river in chapter 22, Revelation 22? Also, on either side of the street there, the river, there was the tree of life that was there, and the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. It gave its fruit. And then we also find the Lord God and man together. Notice all of the similarities between the Garden of Eden and then the picture, the depiction of what it's going to be at the end by John in Revelation chapter 22. All of these things are there. Now, some of you who may be aware of some of the debates out there, you may be starting to think, this is sounding an awful lot like creation eschatology here. Creation eschatology. Eschatology is just one of those fancy words you probably are familiar with. It's a study of the end times, or a view of the end times. What's it going to be like at the end? That's eschatology. Creation eschatology, it's this belief that heaven itself is simply going to be a restoration of the Garden of Eden. That what God is going to do, he's just going to hit the reset button, and he's going to refurbish everything, and we're going to go back to the garden, and that's what heaven will be. And quite frankly, creation eschatology has a lot going for it when you look through the scriptures. First of all, we just talked about all the similarities between how heaven is described and how you see the Garden of Eden in Genesis chapter 2, right? It seems as if you are meant to be drawn to this picture where God is going to put a kind of a reset, a refurbishment on things and start over. You look at Romans chapter 8, and we're not going to read that, but remember, this is that section in Romans where Paul's talking about the glory that's to come, and he talks about how creation itself is even groaning, and it's yearning for the time that it's going to be what? Set free from the curse. Not that it's going to just totally disappear and be wiped out, but there's this idea behind it that it's going to have the curse simply removed from it. That what we're doing is God is going to take all of creation and put it back pre-Genesis 3. We're going to go back to Genesis chapter 2. And it's hard to get around this because in our minds we have this view that heaven is there, just there because Jesus ascended into heaven. Those are the pictures. We have, angels go up and sit on the clouds or whatever. Heaven is there. And so what we're going to do, some glad morning when this life is o'er, I'll fly away, right? We're going to get up and we're going to go and we will leave earth behind and go to heaven. But what's the picture in Revelation chapter 21 and 22? Heaven, the New Jerusalem, comes down to earth. This isn't escapism eschatology, which is a view that a lot of people have that says, well, we're just biding our time here on this earth, but when the time comes, whoop, I'm gone. I'm going to escape this. The picture that John paints is we stay, heaven comes down. And the New Jerusalem comes down as a bride adorned for a husband. There's a lot that creation eschatology has to offer. However, it does have a few problems, which is why I don't fully buy into creation eschatology. First of all, it has the same flesh and blood that Paul says this flesh and blood cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven, right? I mean, this flesh and this blood has to be changed in some kind of way. Well, it's this flesh and this blood that was in the Garden of Eden. And so something has to be different between those. I can't tell you that I know exactly everything that's going on in Luke chapter 20, 34 and 35, when he says, they came to trip up Jesus about whose wife would this person be, and he goes, you're talking about stuff that you just don't know, which, by the way, they were. We talked about that, this idea we don't know what heaven's going to be, right? It says y'all are talking about stuff you just don't know. In heaven, there's not going to be marriage or giving into marriage and all of that. Well, I don't know exactly what that will be in heaven, but it seems as if he's making the statement that's going to be different than things are now. And the way that things are now in the marriage relationship goes back to Genesis 2, does it not? And Adam and Eve. And also, it is important to see this. In Genesis 2, it's a garden. In Revelation 22, it's a city. That's a big difference. That's a huge difference. And I think that we need to at least allow for this. City was not God's creation. City was man's creation as a means of rebellion against God. Even though it wasn't the first city, what we see is the very first real rebellion against God takes place at Babel, where God said, fill out, spread and take over the earth. And they said, no, God, we're not going to spread out. We're going to congregate together right here. They were rebelling against God, and that is what the city did. Babel becomes Babylon, which is the great symbol for what is wrong, what is evil in the world. And yet, in the end, what does God do? He takes man's city, and then he reappropriates it for himself. He makes it that which is right and perfect. But note that it's not what you find in the garden. So I say all of this just to try to say, do we really know what heaven's going to be like? No. We don't. That's just the reality. Nobody knows. We can get some ideas, but we just don't know for sure. And I usually will liken this to the way that the Jews understood the Messianic kingdom. Did they have pictures in their scriptures of what the Messianic kingdom was going to be? Absolutely. They had a lot of pictures of what the Messianic kingdom was going to be. Did they understand what the Messianic kingdom was going to be? And even when it came, did they even recognize it? No, they didn't. They thought they knew what it was going to be. They had all kinds of lessons and all kinds of preachers and everyone telling them this is what the Messianic kingdom's going to be. They just knew that they knew that they knew that they knew what the Messianic kingdom was going to be. And then Jesus showed up and he said, yeah, y'all got that wrong. Because it's not that. And then you wonder, well, was it just because they were bad at exegesis? They just didn't know their Bible well enough? Well, no, that's not it at all. In fact, Paul specifically says it was a mystery. Multiple times in Colossians, he tells them it was a mystery. Why would we assume that as we are future looking into the next stage of, I guess you could say, spiritual development, whatever that's going to be, why would we assume it's going to be any different? I don't think that we can have any confidence when we speak and we say, this is what heaven's going to be. I think we need to be an awful lot more humble as we approach the subject and realize that it's very likely we could be wrong. But at least we know why we want to go to heaven, right? I mean, that's the important thing. Well, it's here that oftentimes you may ask, someone, why do you want to go to heaven? You might get some answers like this. Well, I want to see my mom again, or I want to see my wife again, or my husband again, or my grandmother or grandfather or somebody. This idea of wanting to see loved ones. And yeah, that's a very popular view, and you find that to some degree within scriptures. You see some of this idea just coming to mind. Remember David, he says, I can go to my son again, but he can never come back to me, and maybe there's some of that there. Some just think, man, I want eternity just to go and explore, to enjoy whatever this world is going to be. I want this idea, this opportunity to be a great explorer and to just go out and learn. And speaking of learning, maybe the idea of fully knowing, just as we are fully known, as Paul talks about, this idea of being able to go in and have that knowledge, have that understanding. And if it's not directly built into us, having the opportunity to go up to people, and say, Paul, what did you mean when you wrote X, Y, or Z? Or something like that, right? I mean, just having these chances. Some people say, I just want to bask in the beauty. I just want to walk the golden streets, or I just want to take in the pearly gates, or whatever the case is. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with these. In fact, I think these could have an awful lot of merit to them. I think some of these things are all well and good. But if any of these is the reason, the main reason that you want to go to heaven, might I suggest that perhaps our motivation is a little bit off. Why do we want to go to heaven? It's because we want to be with our God the way that we were created to be. And this is what Paul really is trying to drive into us. Remember Philippians chapter 1, verse 23. He says, having the desire to depart and be with Christ, because that is so much better. Remember, this is when he's in prison and the people in Philippi, they're worried about him being in prison. He's like, guys, don't even worry about me. Because if this is my death, I'm all the better for it. I have no problem. Yeah, take me. Let me go on, but I do know that it would be better for your sake if I stuck around. So, to live as Christ, to live is to suffer as Christ suffered, and to sacrifice myself for your sake. To live as Christ, but to die, that's gain. Don't pray for me that I'm going to not die, because to live, to depart, and to be with Christ is very much better. Notice he doesn't say to depart and any of those other things that we talked about. It's to depart and to be with Christ. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. We're of good courage, and we prefer rather to be absent from the body and to be at home with the Lord. This is a passage in chapter 4. He's talked about how the stuff that we suffer it's all momentary, light affliction, which is producing an eternal weight in glory as we focus not on the things which are seen, but we focus on the things which are not seen. He says, I don't care about this existence. What I want is the eternal weight of glory that I have waiting for me. And then he goes into chapter 5 and he starts talking about how, we want to put off the tent, the temporary dwelling, because we want to be at home with the Lord. And it's being at home, not just to be in heaven. It's being at home because that's where the Lord is. And that's where we want to be. Every picture that we see of heaven in any kind of way, Old Testament, New Testament, whatever the case is, every picture is focused on God being at the center of this picture. It's not for the benefit of everybody else. It's that God is first and foremost the focus. And then we see we were created to have a relationship with God. We weren't created for those other things. First and foremost, we were created to have a relationship with our God. And when you look at the opposite, as Paul describes it in 2 Thessalonians chapter 9, he talks about those who have been persecuting them there in Thessalonica. He says these are going to pay the penalty of eternal destruction. And what is that penalty? That penalty is being away from the presence of the Lord and the glory of his power. This is what hell is. And again, we could do a whole sermon on all of the way that hell's described, and some point and some time, that's going to come out. We'll talk about it in a class or sermon or something like that. But all the ways that hell is described, yeah, what we talked about with heaven, hell. It's accommodative language. It's there to talk about an experience that you cannot experience, and it's putting it in some kind of language that you can understand. And he says here, this is what eternal destruction is. It's not a physical being destroyed for eternity. It is being away from the presence of the Lord and the glory of his power. That is what hell is. And if you want to know just how bad that is, think about what it would be like for your body to be on fire for eternity, or for worms to be eating your insides, but they never die, or to be in a place where you are, sensory deprivation and you have nothing. There's just outer darkness. You can't touch, smell, feel, see anything throughout all of eternity. Or imagine, being just completely destroyed continually. Yeah, well, a lot of those pictures are mutually exclusive. I hope we can see that. But that's not the point. The point is you don't want to be there, because this is what hell is. So what does that tell us about heaven? If hell is the absence of God and the glory of his power, that means the focus of heaven, the real beauty of heaven, the amazingness of heaven, the why we want to be there of heaven, is because that's where God is. And we can spend eternity face to face with God, and to bask in the glory of his power, and to be there, and to spend all of that time with him. This is what heaven is all about. Which is why I would suggest that moving forward, instead of thinking of heaven, as a place where there's streets of gold and all of that is to help you to know you want to be there. But if you want to know what heaven is being in the presence of the Lord, and it's basking in the glory of his power. And that should motivate us to be there throughout all eternity. Don't you want to be there? I know I do. And I hope we can all be there forever, in the presence of the Lord, basking in the glory of his power. Would you bow with me? Our great and amazing God, as we contemplate the nature of heaven this morning, we do so recognizing that first and foremost it is the realm in which your will is done, in which your glory is beheld, in which a relationship with you is enjoyed. Help us now to live in a way that demonstrates our love for you and our hope to spend eternity with you in heaven. We thank you for Jesus. We thank you for the one who gives us that hope. And it's in his name we now pray. Amen.